Build your career with CMI confidence? It all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders. With its on-demand resources, network of mentors and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Hello, and many thanks for joining us for today's event. Today we're going to learn a little bit more about Chartered Management Consultant. I'm Matt Roberts. I'm the Director at CMI with responsibility for Chartered Management Consultant. And as the event goes on today, I'm going to be joined by two guests who I'll introduce you to a little bit later on, Scott Rodham Boyd and Josh Campbell. Before we introduce the guests, I'd like just to share with you a few slides, giving you a bit of background to what Chartered Management Consultant is and the way in which it is transforming consulting careers and firms. Moving on to our next slide, you can see here that this is a young chartership. We fully launched Chartered Management Consultant, or ChMC as we abbreviate it to, back in April of 2021. And that followed a pilot scheme involving a number of organisations, a variety of sizes and specialism from across the consulting spectrum from 2019 through to 2020. The growth of Chartered Management Consultant is going great guns. In fact, we're going to reach the 1,000 Chartered Management Consultants mark before we get to Christmas of this year. Record numbers of people are now coming through the process to get chartered. As you can see, over the last year, we've grown by more than 40%. I want to share with you a few of the impacts of Chartered Management Consultant. And on our next slide, you can see that when we talk to those that come through the process, 94% of them are saying that actually getting chartered helps to really demonstrate the excellence that they're delivering for their clients, the integrity that they offer, and also their own commitment to ethical practice, which is of huge reassurance to those clients. ChMC is something that we're offering to consultants right across management consulting. Whether you're working independently, running your own business, part of a small team, or working for a large international organization, Chartered Management Consultant is something that will be relevant to your skills and enable you to gain professional recognition for the good job that you're doing. As you can see here, Paul Terrington, who heads up consulting for UK and EMEA for PwC, recently went through the process. Paul is saying here that he found the process to be appropriately challenging, stretching, regardless of the fact that he's got a huge amount of experience as a management consultant. This isn't the sort of thing that you can do just of an evening and rock up to the assessment and expect to pass. This is something that over time you need to work towards, and there's a real sense of achievement that comes from gaining this chartership. Moving on to our next slide, I'd like just to share with you some further thoughts from others that have gone through the process. As you can see, the vast majority of people are talking extremely positively about the process of becoming chartered. 8 out of 10 people who get ChMC are telling us that they feel motivated to stay in the industry as part of the consequences of getting chartered. 8 out of 10 also say that getting chartered is helping them to demonstrate the public benefit of their work as a management consultant. And 7 out of 10 are saying that getting chartered is helping them, or they believe it will help them, to deliver positive financial benefits for their organisation. Great positives from people that are coming through the ChMC assessment process. And indeed, we find that over time, those that get chartered are telling us that they also feel that their self-awareness and self-confidence improves as a result of getting chartered. It's not just, though, about the impact on the individual consultant where we're seeing benefits of Chartered Management Consultant. We're also finding that increasingly clients are starting to take notice. In the UK, the government are one of the biggest buyers of management consultancy services. And so we were delighted recently that Nick Griffin from the Cabinet Office gave us this very supportive and encouraging quote about what it is that government are looking for when they're procuring consultancy services in terms of efficiency, quality, cost effectiveness, and the fact that actually ChMC is something that's providing a level of assurance that consultants may indeed meet those standards. So great to have Nick's support on this, and indeed others, colleagues of his across the public sector. And I think it's also important to give you an understanding of how this is being recognised across the management consulting sector. So on our next slide, we'll see that recently at the 2023 MCA Awards, David Orr of Mott Macdonald was not only given the award for Chartered Management Consultant of 2023, but he was also named as the Times Consultant of the Year. Great to see David's achievements recognised, and fantastic to give the new Chartership such profile alongside fellow consulting achievements during this year. That's a lovely segue into the next part of our session today, and I'd like to introduce our first guest, Scott Rodham Boyd. Scott is the Programme Manager for Chartered Management Consultant at Mott Macdonald. Scott was also one of the very first Chartered Management Consultants. In fact, he was in the first 10 people to go through the pilot assessments. And so I'm delighted to have Scott with us today to share some of his thoughts on Chartered Management Consultant. Welcome along, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Good to see you. And I think maybe if you can give us a little bit of a reflection from yourself in terms of why you feel it's important that we now have a chartership for management consulting.
Yes, I can do. Thank you. I think, the chartership, it's really important. Obviously, it's very, very important. I think one of the first points is around driving up standards across our industry. So I think this is one of the sort of original considerations that we had when we set down this path as an industry and a sector. So I think driving standards up is definitely one point. I think it also sets out a level of expectation, both for clients and consultants, in terms of what we want to achieve and what people can expect from a chartered management consultant, and also helps just generally in terms of professionalism. The fact that you can say you're chartered, and I think it puts us on par with other professions that, I know this is, as you've said, quite a young profession in terms of chartership. It's kind of the start of the journey, but we are on that journey, and that's the key for me. I think, the UK consulting industry adds an enormous amount of value, UK PLC, and I think it's right that we have the option to become chartered. So, really, really important, and, proud to be part of it actually going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Scott. And just as I mentioned a moment ago, you were really at the vanguard of this, one of the first 10 chartered management consultants. And it's a little while since you went through the process, but perhaps given that that's the case, you could give us a few reflections on how you feel about your own chartered status and what difference it's made for you.
Yeah, sure. As you said, it was quite a while ago now, and I done it slightly later in my career. Not that I'm at the end of my career, I'm nowhere near it, but this is typically done. Charterships will typically be done once this is rolled out, with people who are at the sort of start of their career, maybe 5-6 years in, and they've maybe finished their grad scheme or their professional training if they're with a bigger firm or not. But I done it later in my career. I went through the experience route. And I think depending on when you do it, you will get different things from it. So what an early career professional, if we can use that term, what they will get will probably be slightly different. I spend a lot of time with early career professionals who have been through chartership or on the journey. And I think what they see it as getting access to better projects, and better opportunities. So that's that. But for me, it was much more about self-awareness, and an opportunity to really look at my skills and my experience and challenge myself on that. And actually looking back, it did push me to look for additional development opportunities. So even though I got there, I passed it. It was hard work and quite nerve-wracking when you were one of the first cohort, because you don't want to not get it. But that sort of self-reflective piece was really, really valuable. And I think, speaking to other sort of more senior professionals and consultants, I think that's a similar kind of thing that we all get from it. It's just time when you've got a really busy day job to force yourself to take time out and actually focus on you. I think there's a lot of value in that. The other thing I would say, it definitely helped me promote my career within the business I work in. Chartership and technical excellence in Mott Macdonald is really, really important. And we had a large advisory business where there wasn't a chartership available, so getting that early on really differentiated me from others. That's probably less of a benefit going forward now because we're scaling up and more and more people are getting it. But that was something that I benefited from as well on the back of this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a really positive experience for me personally.
Very good. And I think you're right, Scott, that opportunity in our careers to take a bit of time to reflect on the sort of journey that we've been on, some of the achievements we've made, even some of the challenges that we've faced is quite rare. We're normally sort of moving straight on to the next challenge and so forth without having the opportunity to stop and take a pause to reflect. That's something that many of your sort of fellow chartered management consultants are also reflecting positively on as part of their assessment journey. And I think also, as you say, in an organisation like Mott Macdonald, where you've got people in other charterships across the broader organisation, having that opportunity for almost parity of recognition as a professional is something I've heard others mention as well. So good to get your thoughts on that. Now, you weren't really satisfied just with becoming a chartered management consultant yourself. You then went on to work across the organisation at Mott Macdonald to implement an accredited pathway for other professionals in the business, particularly those earlier in their career, as you mentioned earlier on, to work through a pathway that would result in them being ready for their chartered assessment. I just wondered if you'd got any thoughts on the benefits that the firm and perhaps some of the individuals, people like David Orr, who we mentioned earlier on, have gained from that pathway.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think, one of the, that sort of self-reflection piece with ChMC, one of the questions you do get asked at the end of it is, when you're talking about CPD, is giving back the profession, giving back the business, and, how do you sort of pave the way for others? So again, that gets you thinking about these things. So yeah, it was really important for me to do this within my firm and take the opportunity, because it was no good. There is an element of, right, 10 of us got chartered from firms, and we want to get more people chartered. Unless we scale it up, it actually just falls flat on its face, really, and you don't really get the value. You need everybody in the sector to sort of take this on. But also there was a little bit of, I'd got through sort of 15 years of my career with none of this in place. And at times it was quite tough. It was quite hard to, as you say, be in an organization that's very technical and lots of other people have charterships and you don't have that. You have to work doubly as hard at times. So I didn't want other sort of younger people coming through to have to do that. And I thought this is a great opportunity. So we implemented it, I think, as one of the initial pilot firms. In terms of benefits from an individual perspective, there was a lot of benefits because there was a very structured pathway. It contributed positively to staff engagement around those pathways and opportunities. I mean, it was just very, very good for the people when we put it in, and they really loved the clarity on progression, and they knew what they needed to do to progress through the first couple of years of their career. So that's been really, really good. I think more interestingly, from a firm's perspective, you're thinking, what do you get from a firm's perspective? So, aside from the fact that you've got quite a happy and engaged, community in terms of their professional development, but actually, what else do you get on top of that? And I think with all these things, it's quite hard to measure it really accurately. But in my experience, I do think it has had a positive impact on our ability to attract early careers talent, definitely. And I also think it bleeds into retention, because I know a handful of people that when they left the business, before we had this in place, it was to do with not having that sort of clarity and transparency around progression routes. And that was another reason why we wanted to do this. But I think also the process of mapping out, if you do go through the accreditation process, you have to obviously go and start mapping out your training, your development, your pathways, your curriculum, all of that good stuff. And you have to really focus and challenge yourself on it. And actually, doing that every year, obviously it's a bit more upfront and then it's lesser each year. But doing that each year is actually a really good formal check and balance with a little bit of external challenge from CMI. So I think that's actually been really quite helpful, and that's slightly wider than Chartership. That's around our development pathways.
Okay, so there's a wider benefit, as you say,
Yeah.
and almost in the way that as an individual, there's a chance to reflect that accreditation process for the firm is that check to see, are we giving the right development to get our people where they need to be?
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank you. What about your clients? Are they starting to take notice of this, or is it a bit early days for that to really start to manifest?
So it's a good question. Clients, that is an area where we know we need to do more on. So, and by that, what I mean is we don't currently promote it, if I'm being honest, in our bids. We don't put it in bids. We are going to start to do that from next year, I hope. And I think it'll probably go in around, if you're the sort of natural parts of where you would put on the tender would be around resourcing plans and how you develop your staff technically and things like that. I mean, we have had some positive stories in individuals. David Orr, who you've mentioned, obviously, we got a lot of interest and press around that, and clients have asked us about it. But it's something that I've talked about at length with other firms who've been on the journey, and it's something we all want to do more of. But I think up until sort of now, you didn't want to go and make such a big deal with your clients and say, "Oh, how many people have you?" Yeah, with like 10 people. It's not. It's kind of. I think now is probably the right time to start doing that. Better engagement with clients, at a firm level. But yeah, it's definitely something that we need to do more of.
And I guess as the record numbers of people are becoming chartered now, we're about to go through that 1,000 milestone, as I mentioned, before the end of 2023. So that appears as though that's starting to create the case where you'll want to feel confident promoting this more actively with your clients. Good stuff. Okay, and just remembering that this chartered management consultant accreditation is available to people working in organizations of every size, whether independent through to large international businesses. Do you have any sort of tips or advice, I guess, for people that are about to go through the assessment process themselves?
I do, yes. And, it's a really good point actually around, I work for a relatively big firm, but that doesn't mean that, I know lots of people, independents through the Institute of Consultant I'm involved in, that have been through this as well, right through all your SMEs. So it is a chartership. It is open to everybody. It isn't exclusive to big firms. And actually we need it to not be just big firms, really, for it to be properly, highly thought of and inclusive. So I think it's definitely a really good point. In terms of advice or sort of thoughts for people, I think depending on which of those sort of brackets you fall into, the approach for how you would do this as an independent or a very small firm will be very different to how you would do it if you're working for something like Mott Macdonald, where you've got, thousands of people. So I think about, well, I guess the principles for me would be, think about what you want to get out of it at the start. So, we in Mott Macdonald started doing the accreditation, and we used it to do a full review of our pathways and a slightly bigger piece around how we organized ourselves and what capabilities we wanted to develop and deliver to the market. So accreditation was one part of a bigger change program. But equally, I know other firms that have just went in and said, right, we're going to get the accreditation. We feel we have a good offer in place and go for it. But I think just being clear at the outset on what you want to get out of it, it'll be really helpful. Treat it like, and I guess this doesn't matter whether you're an independent or a big firm, treat it like a project or a change program, because there's certain things you need to get done by certain dates, and it's just useful to have that approach. And I guess more so if you are in, SMEs or slightly larger firms, get senior management buy-in. It's essential, because you're gonna need them to sign off on a lot of this stuff as you need to reaccredit every year, for example. So you need to be building that in each year. But I think, those three simple things: think about what you want to get out of it, treat it like a project or a change program, and get your senior stakeholders engaged and bought into it. And I think you'll have a positive experience with it.
Fantastic, Scott. Thank you very much. We're We're going to bring you back into the event a little bit later on when we take some questions from our audience. And by the way, if you're watching live and you have got a question, please do pop it into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. I'm now going to take the opportunity to introduce Josh Campbell, and having heard a little bit about the benefits or the impacts, I should say, that Chartered Management Consultant is making across the industry and getting the benefit of Scott's insights. Josh is going to take us through a little bit more depth in terms of how ChMC is structured and some of the core elements of the way in which it works. So Josh, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. So we can bring the slides back up again. I've got a few slides really on the how, but just before we go into that, a quick reflection on the why. And I was scribbling furiously while Scott was talking. I think kind of almost working this right to left. It is from a firm perspective. There's two communities. There's the early career staff, and that's all about what it's helping firms with is structure. It gives your early careers people a real pathway, a real clarity of progression with something that Scott talked about, which helps attraction, retention, and engagement. So there's a real compelling reason on that side. And then with it more experienced staff, it's that level of expectation for both them and your clients, as well as that parity of recognition with, the accountants, the surveyors, the engineers, and so on and so forth. Then from an individual perspective, the biggest comment I hear is it will give you confidence in your competence. So the net promoter score for ChMC is 88, which if anyone who knows anything about that, that's off the scale. That's in the top percentile. So those people who've gone through this love it. And there's both that confidence that it will give you, and also the other point Scott was talking about is that time to reflect. As you're rushing around, involved in projects, to have the time to really reflect on your practice against this, best in class standard is a huge benefit to people. So those are the main benefits that we have been told about. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is the competency framework. Now, what I will say with it, if you're on here as an individual, this is the key. And there's a document with the framework in it, which will come out after, and that's probably what I'd say is your due diligence document. So just make sure that you're comfortable with that before you move ahead. But essentially, there's four main elements, which again were spoken about. Not going to go into too much detail on the call, but right at the core of that is value, ethics, and behaviours. So acting in your client's best interest against best practices. The second bit, those of you who are chartered managers will recognise this. This is all about leadership and management, all the elements of that. We understand that with chartership, with independence, that might be virtual rather than formal. The fourth part is an ongoing commitment to professional development once you've got chartered and a nominal annual subscription. The key is this third element, the client operating environment. So on here, who are your customers? Then how do you do strategy and analysis? Where do you specialize? How do you deliver? And who are your stakeholders? So that framework is used in two ways. So for those representing firms, you can use this and give this to your early career staff and go, look, this is best practice. Start reflecting on your own practice against this framework. The second, obviously, for those that are at the point of assessment, this is what you will be assessed against. And what we'll talk about in a few minutes' time is how that happens. But that's the framework. It was built by us, the MCA, the Management Consulting Association, and the industry itself. So it is the highest standard that one can achieve as a consultant. So moving on to the next slide. So what we've also realised is that depending on where you are in your career, there are different stages, and so again, with your early careers staff, you can give this to them and say, look, after 2 years, this is the sort of level we would expect you to be at. The easiest way to understand this is that the 3 levels are foundation, which isn't tested. The foundation is you should know. The second stage, which is associate applied, is you should be doing. The third is for full chartership, you should be leading. And so the framework is split depending upon where you are on that journey. So moving on to the next slide, there are various pathways to this. So you've got 2 options. It is, as Scott said, what Mott Macdonald has done is they've accredited their own internal program against that framework. So that means anyone coming into the organisation can start on that journey, from graduates to people with 7 years plus experience. So if that's the sort of thing that you're looking at as a solution for your entire team, we would recommend you think about accrediting your own internal program. Because other than that, there's an experiential route and there's a qualification route. So if you haven't got a company accredited program, to achieve associate status, you will need to have 5 years experience mapped against the framework. For full chartership, you will need to have 7 years. Now that gets accelerated on an accredited program to 3 years for associate award, 5 years for full chartership. And that's replicated in the qualified route. So if you do a level 5 diploma, it drops to 3 years, and a level 7 extended diploma, 5 for full chartership. And again, we'll be sending all this detail out after, because I'm conscious that there's a lot of detail in that one. So, and then next slide is we're going to start putting some links in that will they're going to stay for the rest of the event. So essentially, if you're an independent, you've got 7 years experience, you're confident that you meet all the requirements of the framework, you can effectively sign up now. We've put the link into the chat. It's all done online. The one thing I would say is just make sure that you've got the time to do it. When you're coming to the end of a project is an obvious time to do that. And if you're not sure, just use the framework to double check that you've got the stories, those sort of 4 to 6 stories that you have. And what we're interested in is what the difference that you have made and what you have learned, rather than the team or the company that you work for. If you're not quite sure, once you've done all that, for independents, we're going to hold another event next week. Again, the link's going to be in the chat. It's going to be held next Tuesday. It will be a similar session to this, a Q&A, just to help you clarify any additional questions that you might have. Now, if you're here on behalf of your firm and you're looking potentially at a solution for your early careers talent all the way through to experienced professionals, there's a link in the chat where you can book a direct session with me. There's a bit more we'd need to talk about. It's a relatively straightforward process, but I would suggest booking a session with me directly. There's a slot available tomorrow. Then there's slots available the week next week, the week after that in December. If none of those work, just drop me an email. But there are a variety of different paths. The one in here that we're going to talk about in the Q&A a bit more is that if you are an experienced professional, you've got 2 options. One is a written submission. Anyone below experienced professional, it needs to be a written submission. Experienced professional level, you could do the written submission, or there's a second option, which is what we call the depth interview process, where you essentially write less and talk more. And we're going to go into a bit more detail of that in the Q&A. Regardless, it's a 2-stage process. The written submission comes first. We refer or approve it. And once that's approved, you move to professional discussion. And then once you've got through that, you're chartered. So But just before we move into Q&A, final slide from me. If you're looking for more information, again, the links will be put in the chat. Go to our website, and that's the top link. The bottom is my email address, so feel free to email me directly. And like I said, if none of the dates in the schedule work, drop me an email and I'll see what I can sort out for you. So that's the end of the slides. What we're going to move on to next is a Q&A session. I know we've got some questions that were submitted in advance, so I'm going to bring Matt and Scott back in. Matt, you're going to lead, I think, with the questions that we've had. And I know we've had a number of comments while we've been on, so we'll take those as well. So Matt, back to you, really.
Great, thanks, Josh. So as Josh says, we've had a number of questions submitted ahead of today, which will help us to cover a little bit more depth and build on what Josh has just been saying. The first such question comes from Hannah, and Hannah was asking, what is the route or process for experienced professionals to become chartered? And Scott, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to elaborate on top of what Josh has mentioned already that might just help to paint the picture for Hannah a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think good question, Hannah, around experienced professionals. I think there's the two routes that Josh, I think, explained about. One's the standard route you do, and the other's the in-depth. I think, my experience, for what it's worth, I done the experienced professional route. The in-depth one wasn't available when we done it, but I have had 10 people from our leadership team go through this recently, and half of them done the depth and the other half didn't. And it was a very mixed opinion as to what was better. And I don't think, my conclusion is that they're just slightly different, and what works for one will not work for another. So I think just, my advice would be there's loads of information on the website, on the CMI website on it. Probably read through and think about what would work best for you. Don't just assume that, the depth one sounds great, because it is less time, but just build in, how much time are you really going to spend? Because if you're going to have a more in-depth interview, you're probably going to find that you're going to put quite a bit of prep in up front. So, yes, one of the routes, there's a bit more written up front, but what our sort of learning was from the people in my team that done it was that actually they both probably in all put in the same amount of time, if I'm honest. It just, some of it was in the form of written and some of it was in the form of less formal preparation. So it just depends what works better for you.
Great, thanks very much, Scott. And as Josh has mentioned, I'd urge that you either look to book into the session next week, where Josh will cover in more depth the various routes that are available, and take a look at the website. So there's a nice little diagnostic tool on there that helps you to understand the differences between the routes, and the link that's been shared in the chat provides you with access to that. We've also had a number of people ask a little bit about the costs of getting chartered. So Josh, I don't know if you wanted just to cover that off for us, please.
Yes, and again, this will come out in the pack after, but grab a pen if you're taking notes now. So let's start with individual accreditation. For experienced professional, a written submission is $880 plus VAT. Now, the one thing I say on all the prices is that they're all going up by 6-7% on January the 1st. So if you're in a position you want to move forward, then there is a benefit to do so now, but don't rush it. So $880 for written submission. For the depth interview, it's $1320. Associate professional written submission is the same as the experienced professional, so that's $880. The other one I'll give out now is if you're looking at company accreditation. So as Mott Macdonald having your own internal program accredited, that's £5,000. And then there's an ongoing reaccreditation fee of $2,200. The final one, which isn't on here, is that the ongoing CPD, which if you're here on behalf of your firm, you normally get individuals to pay, is £50. So it's a nominal fee, but just keeps you honest on your CPD. So again, this will come out in the pack, and I'll dive into more detail about this on Tuesday.
Great, thanks, Josh. Really useful. I've just had a question come up via one of our viewers on LinkedIn. Apologies, it hasn't pulled your name through. But, you've recently completed a level 7 certificate in professional consulting, and just asking about whether this will help towards the chartership. So thinking back to the slide that Josh showed a few moments ago, one of the routes towards chartered assessment is the qualified route. Now, in order to use your qualification as part of your route of entry to chartered management consultant, you'd need to top up with a few more units of your level 7. So it'd be a level 7 extended diploma that will then enable you to come forward for ChMC assessment, providing you have 5 years of consulting experience. Alternatively, if you've already got 7 years of consulting experience, of course, you can come forward as an experienced professional without the need for further study. David has asked the question: how long does it take to get through the company accreditation process, and what are the sort of resource requirements of doing so? It's a good question, and Scott, I'll come to you in a moment, but what I would say to David is that we do find when we work with firms moving through accreditation, we now have 26 firms that are fully accredited and another 8 that are working on this at the moment. There is quite a variation, and it does depend on, well, I guess the urgency that the organisation is attaching to this in the first place, but also just in terms of the people that they're asking to lead on the process and competing priorities that they may have. But Scott, interested a little bit if you can recall what the process was at Mott Macdonald and how you guys went about it.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. I'm glad somebody's asked it. I think, what you've said 100%, Matt, it really depends in terms of how long does it take and resource. It really depends on what you want to get out of it. I think some firms I know have done it in 2 to 3 months. I mean, you could absolutely do it in 2 months if you know what your offer is, and you've got it written down or on a system somewhere, and you're confident you can map that and then talk a CMI accreditor through it. You could easily get that done in two months. However, for others and ourselves in Mott Macdonald, we took a year to do it. But we took a year because I think, as I said earlier, excuse me, we used it to do a full sort of review of all of our learning pathways across our full advisory business, not just consulting. And we got a lot of value out of it. So it was really good because it fell whenever it came at a time when we had something else going on, and it was just a good match. But I think in terms of resource, it really depends. I think a lot of the firms that will go for this will have L&D departments and teams, and in my experience, it depends how busy they are. Because everybody's got day jobs, and this often, although it's important, it still plays sort of second fiddle to your client work and supporting your client teams. So I think it's quite an individual thing, but broadly think sort of 2 months to a year if you want to do a full scale review is probably a good guide to go by.
Great, thanks, Scott. We're coming towards the end of the session. We've got time for a few more questions, so if you are with us live, then don't hesitate to add your question to the chat. Jenny has asked about, this relates to the accredited option, but she's thinking about graduates coming into her firm, and she asks, I'm looking to use ChMC for my graduate intake. When should I think about registering them? And again, Scott, I think probably your best place to answer this.
Yeah, so I would say first 6 months is the simple answer. It's as much to demonstrate buy-in to the grads, because you'll typically have sold them this at recruitment fairs or at an assessment day or interview. You'll have said to them, as part of our offer, this is what you get. So actually, getting them in and getting them signed on early is a good commitment, and it just shows that you've held up your part, and it gets some skin in the game, excuse the term. I think as well, it also gives them access to some of the CMI resources, Matt. And in the past we've done things like webinars and master classes and all of that. So one of the struggles I had within my firm was as somebody that took a lot of this on personally and started to try and drive it. Once you start to scale up, it becomes quite difficult, because it's just you and maybe a handful of others. And actually, as much as we could push on the CMI and MCA as well to do a lot of this stuff, really helped me. And I think that's where we're headed, Matt, isn't it? There's a lot of stuff that CMI can do in terms of masterclasses, webinars, sharing documents. And if they're signed up to that, they'll start getting those emails and those opportunities. So I think that's probably another benefit to putting them in early. But definitely for me, in my experience, it was getting that buy-in. Because we didn't initially put them in. We used to maybe leave them up to a year, and then we got some feedback. So now, as soon as the cohort comes in, which is our next to September, by October, they'll all be signed up on it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. And I think we've got time just to shoehorn in one more question before we finish. And this comes from Mary, who's joined us via YouTube. Mary asks, with regards to the competency framework, do you need to be at chartered level for each of the criteria in order to become chartered? That's a really good question, Mary. And as we showed on the slides earlier on, the framework is quite comprehensive. It's been designed by stakeholders right across the consulting sector and covers a lot of ground. There are actually 54 separate competencies within that framework. We're not looking for every person that comes for assessment to be able to demonstrate every single competency and every one of them being at the chartered level. We expect you in the majority of cases, the majority of criteria, you will indeed be operating at chartered level. But we do accept that careers vary to a certain degree. So there may be some areas where perhaps you're at that applied level and not quite chartered. But in the majority of cases, you certainly would be expected to demonstrate that you are indeed at that chartered level. Of the 1,000 or nearly 1,000 people that have successfully come through the program, people are from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences. So we want to make sure that we're giving people that opportunity to utilize their experiences to demonstrate their excellence as part of the process. One of the things that we're just about to launch is a new improved set of guidance for people coming forward for chartership, and within there's more detail around the proportion of the assessment that you need to be at that chartered level for in order to pass the assessment. So thank you very much for that question, Mary. I hope that helps. Look, I'd like to say a big thank you to Scott Rodham Boyd, our guest today. Scott, it's been great to hear your insights, and I'm sure that people watching will be very grateful for the advice that you've been able to provide and the experiences you shared. Josh, thank you very much for taking the time to take us through how ChMC works. And as Josh mentioned earlier on, remember there are links in the chat either to book a slot in Josh's diary if you're interested in taking chartership forward within your firm and for your team, or alternatively, if really your interest is about yourself and getting chartered as an individual, remember there's a session coming up next Tuesday. Again, there's a link in the chat. But thank you both very much. Thank you to everybody that's watched, and we hope that you found this incredibly useful. Goodbye.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.